In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, Hollywood had a very specific reflex. If a movie was expensive, loud, and aimed at teenagers, it almost certainly came with a Saturday morning cartoon. RoboCop had one. Rambo had one. Beetlejuice had one? Toxic Avenger had one? Even properties that absolutely did not need to be softened for kids were flattened into 22-minute toy commercials with a theme song and a villain of the week. Studios wanted their blockbusters to exist everywhere at once, on lunchboxes and toy aisles, and on network television before noon on Saturday. Godzilla was not immune to this logic. When TriStar's 1998 Godzilla finally hit theaters after years of false starts and rewrites, it arrived as a full-scale Hollywood event. And it was not received well. The movie underperformed critically and it fractured the fan base almost instantly. But from a corporate standpoint, the damage control plan was already in motion. A cartoon series had been greenlit well before audiences rejected the film. Fox Kids needed content. Sony wanted to salvage the brand, and Toho was watching closely. Out of that mess came Godzilla the series, a show that quietly did what the movie failed to do. It figured out how to make this bizarre version of Godzilla actually work. The series was developed by Jeff Kline and Richard Reynes, with animation handled by Adelaide Productions, the same studio behind Extreme Ghostbusters and Men in Black the series. Those shows understood how to take a divisive film property and reshape it into something functional, episodic, and surprisingly respectful of its source material. Godzilla the series made a clean narrative break from the movie almost immediately. Godzilla dies in the pilot, much like at the end of the movie, his offspring survives, and from there the show leans into a Monster of the Week structure anchored by Nick Tatopoulos and a recurring cast that slowly expands into a global science fiction framework where alien invaders show up, mutant monsters escalate, the scope grows, and continuity actually matters for once. By late season 2, this is a serialized kaiju show wearing the skin of a Saturday morning cartoon. Before revisiting it for this retrospective, my relationship with the series was oddly distant, but positive. I didn't watch it much during its original run because I wasn't born yet. It existed in the background of Fox Kids alongside a dozen other shows competing for attention. It was just one of many Godzilla cartoons, or rather, one of two, that I was aware of as a kid. And I just didn't care. My cartoons were Regular Show and Clarence and Gumball. Years later in high school, I picked up the complete series on DVD, and it became TV that I would put on while I was doing homework. Episodes played while papers got written and notes got rewritten. The show never demanded full attention, and I think that's what really makes it work in its favor. It was a largely inoffensive Monster of the Week Godzilla series, and given the reputation of the 1998 movie, that was honestly enough for me and a lot of other Godzilla fans. Over time, affection for the show grew within the fan base. A big part of that love comes from absence. There still isn't a modern animated Godzilla series built around weekly monster battles. The anime projects are serialized, experimental, and divisive. If you want a clean episodic Godzilla fix with familiar rhythms, this is where fans end up. It fills a gap no one else has bothered to fill. The question is whether that alone is enough. Does the series hold up beyond being the default option? Is it nostalgia slop for aging millennials? Or is it absolutely peak fiction? Let's find out. This is Godzilla the series. Godzilla the series is a direct sequel to the 98 film, but it immediately pivots in a very different creative direction. The premise centers on the end credit kind of sequel bait teaser from the movie, where the Godzilla from the film left behind a surviving offspring. This new creature, often referred to as Godzilla Jr., imprints on scientist Nick Tatopoulos and grows into a fully realized Godzilla over the course of the series. Unlike his parent, this Godzilla is explicitly portrayed as Godzilla, rather than a scared iguana running through a city. The show follows a covert research and defense unit called Humanitarian Environmental Analysis Team, abbreviated to HEAT, which is led by Nick and backed by the US military. Their mission involves tracking, studying, and responding to emerging giant monsters across the globe. Godzilla acts as their reluctant ally, showing up when threats escalate beyond human control. Structurally, the series is just your standard Monster of the Week action show. Each episode introduces a new kaiju, often with a loose scientific or sci-fi explanation, and builds toward a climactic battle with Godzilla. Over time, recurring enemies, mutations, and larger arcs emerge, giving the show more continuity than most animated action series of its era. I think course corrections in media are one of those ideas that sound responsible on paper and routinely collapse in execution. When a creative work becomes controversial, the instinct is to panic, overcorrect, and start writing with the loudest critics in mind, rather than having a pair of balls and just pushing through. Maybe have a sense of authorship and conviction for once. A very recent and very visible example of this is Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, a film that spends an enormous amount of energy trying to undo or soften the choices made in Star Wars: The Last Jedi. The result feels hollow, and instead of strengthening the narrative or the world or even the trilogy, the constant backpedaling fractures everything. Characters lost coherence, themes evaporated, and what remained felt like a highlight reel of crowd-pleasing gestures as opposed to an actual story that believed in itself. I bring all this up because Godzilla the series entered production at a very similar position of cultural damage control. Godzilla 98 was very controversial in a way that went far beyond mixed reactions. For a lot of fans, it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of what Godzilla was supposed to be. The creature's design, behavior, and even its thematic role felt disconnected from the legacy built by decades of Toho films that came before it. Shortly after, the backlash was very loud and very unified. So what makes Godzilla the series so fascinating is that it absolutely feels aware of that backlash, but it refuses to wallow in insecurity. There's a strong sense that the creative team behind it understood what went wrong and made deliberate, confident choices to steer the character back toward familiar territory without turning the show into a checklist of fan demands. This is no Rise of Skywalker, I promise. Godzilla regains his atomic breath. His intelligence and emotional presence are emphasized. His role shifts towards something closer to a guardian figure as opposed to a disposable disaster movie antagonist. The tone changes, but the show never feels embarrassed by its own existence. For me, this is where the series succeeds in a way that many course corrections failed to do so. Instead of desperately trying to erase the past, it acknowledged it and moved on. The animated series builds forward from what that foundation was. The Godzilla on screen feels closer to his Toho counterpart, not because the show is apologizing. It's not. Instead, it does the smart thing and just say, that was one version of Godzilla, here's a new version of Godzilla. Enjoy. I'll fully admit one of my more controversial takes here. I've never been particularly fond of Godzilla. The Hanna-Barbera series, not you get it. It would be really funny to just drop that statement this far into the retrospective, like, yeah, no, I hate this character that I've spent hours and hours yapping about. Growing up, I always found the 1970s cartoon to be ungodly repetitive, with monster designs that blurred together and human characters who existed largely as one-dimensional set pieces between action scenes. The structure was rigid, the personalities were thin, and very little of it stuck with me beyond the novelty of Godzilla being in a cartoon. But Godzilla the series feels like a direct rebuttal to that viewing experience. The monster designs are actually inventive and memorable, often leaning into strange sci-fi concepts that feel pulled from classic pulp as opposed to recycled molds, or, oh look, it's just a giant bird, or oh, it's a giant statue. Here, each creature has a clear identity and presence. The human cast actually looks and feels distinct from one another, both visually and in how they behave. Their dialogue carries personality, their reactions feel human, their relationships evolve in ways that matter to the story being told. They feel like real people. More than anything, it feels like the series is made by people who genuinely love Godzilla, monster movies, and science fiction. There's enthusiasm baked into every single cell of animation. You get this sense of curiosity about what the genre can do, as opposed to just being obliged to replicate what came before. I think they nailed it right off the bat with one of the hardest intro sequences ever put on weekday television, and I don't think that gets emphasized enough. Lost Utopia Films made a really awesome recreation of this in Blender. Go check that out. It rules. From the first ominous notes of the score, the show establishes a tone that refuses to talk down to its audience. The music does a massive amount of heavy lifting. It's foreboding without being gloomy or too aggressive. There's a real sense of propulsion to it, like the show is already in motion before the episode truly starts. The montage is ruthless. I love how the monsters flash across the screen in rapid succession, with each one being so distinct and grotesque. It's one of the best, I guess you could say, opening theme songs, but it's not, whatever, best intros to any cartoon, maybe ever. Besides, like, Evangelion and, like, South Park. I'm not going to go episode by episode because that would take way too long, but I will be going over my absolute favorite episode, which is Monster Wars, Part 1 and 2. In Part 1, Heat's surveillance of Godzilla is interrupted when unexplained alien signals begin causing equipment failures and sharp personality shifts within the team. Trust breaks down, arguments escalate, and the group splinters. At the same time, a new monster threat emerges overseas, as a massive bat creature devastates rural regions. Evidence slowly surfaces that the US military has recovered alien technology, and that key personnel are being subtly influenced. Godzilla confronts the bat and drives it off, though the encounter makes it clear the creature is being remotely controlled. In Part 2, the situation worsens as more monsters are reveeled to be under coordinated external control. Heat uncovers an alien operation actively restoring its systems, using compromised scientists and military leadership. During an infiltration, the team witnesses the return of the original Godzilla, rebuilt as a mechanized enforcer. Godzilla hesitates when faced with this resurrected predecessor, giving the aliens an opening to briefly dominate him as well. With control fully established, the aliens deploy multiple monsters toward major population centers across the globe. Finally, in Part 3, global destruction is underway as the alien invasion fleet closes in. While imprisoned, Heat determines that the monster's behavior is tied to a single long-range transmission. By sabotaging this link, they restore the creature's autonomy. The freed monsters immediately recognize the aliens as intruders and begin attacking them. Godzilla ultimately rejects alien influence, confronts the cybernetic Godzilla, and wins. With their forces collapsing, the aliens withdraw from Earth. The remaining monsters survived but are rendered inactive, leaving the military to relocate them to isolated regions for containment and study. Monster Wars Parts 1, 2, and 3 feel like the creative team finally exhaling and saying, okay, now we're going to make the most action-packed Godzilla story of all time. The ambition here lines up directly with what it's essentially remaking, and that's 1968's Destroy All Monsters. You get what could be a very tired plot beat of aliens manipulating monsters to do their evil bidding. When has that ever been done in a Godzilla movie? I know, crazy, right? These are admittedly foundational Toho ideas, and the series commits to them without any hesitation. I think the medium of animation is the secret weapon here, because Destroy All Monsters had the ideas, but not the resources. With that movie, you can tell that they didn't have a ton of money. They had to limit monster interactions, there was constant cutting away from monster stuff, and in general, there's this sense that the movie wants to show you more, but it physically can't. Monster Wars has none of those limitations. Monsters appear across the globe without compromise, their movements feel intentional instead of constrained. The TV show finally delivers on the promise those late Showa-era Godzilla movies made, but could never fully cash in on. I admit it too, it's just cool as shit seeing the original 1998 Godzilla appear. It's great stuff. I'm a sucker for it. Looking at the big picture, Godzilla the series succeeds where so many monster shows stumble because it actually understands the job of its human characters. They are not filler. They are not there to stall until Godzilla shows up. They exist to make the monster of the week structure function without feeling disposable or repetitive. The writing treats them as the engine of the show as opposed to just an obligation, because we need to have human characters. The Heat team works because they feel competent and human at the same time. Nick's bond with Godzilla gives the series an emotional through line without turning him into some chosen one cliche. This series remains one of the strongest examples of how to do Godzilla in an ongoing format, and frankly, I wish the Monsterverse would have taken more notes from this series. Smart human characters keep the narrative moving, original monsters keep the world interesting, and Godzilla anchors everything without suffocating it or taking away too much focus. It's hard to find balance like that in kaiju media, and the show earns every bit of praise that it gets for pulling it off. And with all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick. You are watching Firewood Media. This officially wraps up the Heisei era of my Godzilla retrospective series. I know this isn't technically part of that era, it's kind of its own thing, but I figure it would feel weird if it wasn't included. A lot of people probably assume the next step for me is diving straight into the Millennium era, but I'm deliberately holding off on that. I want to save those films for when Godzilla Minus Zero and Godzilla X Kong Supernova release, when interest in the franchise actually spikes again and I can approach those retrospectives without feeling burnt out. So all of 2026 is going to be dedicated to a full-on Ultraman retrospective series. This is something I've wanted to do for years. On top of that, I'm shifting more time back into original short films and feature film projects, which was the entire reason that this channel existed in the first place. My band is also releasing our debut studio album, It Came From College Radio, so that's another major focus moving forward. If you're here strictly for new Godzilla retrospectives, there's going to be a pause while I recharge and work on other creative projects. At the end of the day, Firewood Media is not and was never meant to be a Godzilla channel. I have a lot of interests and I want this space to reflect that. So if you're here for the new stuff, welcome. If not, thank you for watching my stuff. I really appreciate it. Huge thank you to our channel members for supporting the work that I do. For $1.99 a month, you can get early access, members only content, and your name in the credits of our original projects. Whether you join or not, I appreciate you watching and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.